car. And of course that car went on to become a symbol of what we call the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, Germany's dynamic recovery after the end of the Second World War, which we'll come back to later on, because for the moment I've got to point out this huge building that you can see coming up on your right hand side. What you're looking at here are the SS barracks, the former SS barracks. So built for that notorious organization, originally part of what was called the SA. And if you, Sergey's gone into the bus lane for us so you get a good view of it. And you can see here this very prominent central element of a balcony. Wow. It's a huge building. I've been inside it. It's utterly huge. It really is. It's got quite an eventful history. It was taken over in 1945 by someone else, and you can probably guess who the someone else was. The US Army. They moved in there, and there was a very large base here in Nuremberg, because the Allies, of course, were always keenly aware of the symbolic significance of Nuremberg for the Nazis. Hence, the base here in Nuremberg was 40,000 strong. It was closed down in 1993 after German reunification. That's why today we've got a rather ironic situation, because the present day occupant is a federal bureau, the Federal Bureau of Migration and Refugees. Now, we've crossed over into what is deemed the rally grounds, a huge area in the southeast of the city, 16 square kilometers in all. And that's another reason of Hitler for choosing Nuremberg, because there was masses of undeveloped space here in the southeast part of the city. And he intended to create his personal legacy here. And because he was such an ardent admirer of the Roman Empire, he tended to copy things from it rather a lot. So if you look across now, on your right, you see that huge building looming up. Does it remind you of anything?
Yes. Colosseum.
The Colosseum, quite right, yeah. For what it's worth, it is the largest remaining Nazi building left in Germany. Single building left in Germany. Other thing you should know about it, had it ever been finished, which it wasn't, it's an unfinished building. Had it been finished, it would have been 1.5 times the size of the Colosseum in Rome. But as it is, there's 20 meters, 60 feet missing off the top. So what you can see there is the product of 5 years' work from 1935 to 1940, when work halted on what the Nazis called the biggest building site in the world, the rally grounds. And that's what they remained, because the Nazis only managed to finish one site. The first project to be launched in 1934, it was completed in 1937, and appropriately, that's what we're going to look at next. Here you can see that there's a modern part to this building, and there's a cluster of people outside it. It's a museum, and it was opened there in 2001. And as you can probably guess, the subject matter is the rise and fall of the Third Reich. It was the first museum of its kind in Germany to cover that subject matter, because as you know, for decades, the subject was more or less taboo. People make jokes about it, but that more or less was the situation. Until a young generation grew up that were no longer accepting the silence. And then things began to move rather quickly. At the latest in the 1970s. And a catalyst that actually promoted discussion and engagement with the subject was a US mini TV series. Can you guess which one it was? Mini TV, I never saw it actually. But early 1970s, it was bought, the rights to broadcast it were bought by just one company, one TV company in Germany. None of the others would touch it. It was called Holocaust. No. I watched Hogan's Heroes. Who didn't? No, Holocaust. And for a lot of young people, this was a totally new, information. That changed, of course, as we said, quite considerably in the course of the 70s, and by the time it gets to the 80s, the subject is now being taught in earnest on school curriculums. Now, look ahead, and you can see this huge building. It's actually not under construction. What we're doing here is, and it's not, you've got to be very careful about the nuance. What you're doing here is not restoration, because nobody would ever think of restoring something that was built for Hitler. So it's a case of conservation. The idea being, conserve what is left, lest it happen again. Let's not forget, yeah? Where the fanaticism of one man can lead everyone. Yeah? So conserve but not restore. But nonetheless, just the conservation work is going to cost quite a lot. 85 million euros. Now, with a building of this nature, who pays? Basically, half is going to be shouldered, half of the 85 million is going to be shouldered by the government. 2/3 of the other half, the state of Bavaria. And the rest is Nuremberg. Because, strictly speaking, all the grounds belong to the city of Nuremberg, and that goes back to historically the fact that the city of Nuremberg and the Nazi Party went into business together, because of course these rallies were a money-making affair. So, well, let's make a business out of it. You know, 1 million people coming to the rallies, well, everybody's going to make a pot of cash, from the butchers to the bakers. Perhaps not the candlestick makers, of course, but everybody else. And on the demise of the Nazi Party, what happens? Well, the grounds fall to the city of Nuremberg. We're going to drive up. So Sergi's going to go a little slowly here. And if you look across now, you can see on your right the main grandstand. Yeah? And at the very front of that was a podium where Hitler would stand, the focal point. And topping the central element was a huge swastika, gold-plated swastika. It's no longer there, quite simply because the US Army blew it up on the 22nd of April 1945. It was such an obvious symbol, it had to go. Albert Speer designed this site, and you can see all these blocks here. He wanted it to look like a medieval fortress, to inspire a feeling of power and strength in a people who'd come through a lot, from the blockade during the First World War, where people really couldn't get enough to eat due to the Allied blockade, sea blockade, which was very effective, to, of course, this fraught period of hyperinflation, a slight recovery during the period that we call the Roaring Twenties, and then disaster strikes, the Wall Street crash, the World Depression. So you can imagine that people needed a little bolstering up, and Hitler was just the person to promise them everything: jobs, prosperity, peace. That was his message, and as you can imagine, it went down well, especially with young people who saw little hope of a future for themselves. So he struck a chord there, and he had lots of ideas that on the surface were appealing, especially his idea of the Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community. Today, you know, we're always talking about community and what a good principle it is, social cohesion, solidarity. And young people thought, well, I want to be part of this Volksgemeinschaft. I would like to do my bit, be a worthy member of society. Who wouldn't? But of course, the closer you look at it, you realised how exclusive Hitler's community was, and how many people were excluded from it. Propaganda, of course, was relentless, and to whom did it have the most effect? Who was influenced most by propaganda? Who do you think? What group of people?
Young people.
Young people, exactly, young people. Certainly not people who were older and had perhaps served in the trenches during the Great War. They were certainly a set of people who wanted no war and no truck with it. But young people with their idealized ideas of laying down their life for the Führer, yeah, wow, we'll go for that. Now, you can see the lake there. It's an artificial lake, by the way. I sometimes call it a medieval fish farm because it was built in the 14th century to provide, basically, fish for the local population of the day, because Nuremberg, Bavaria is landlocked, so sourcing fresh fish was a bit of a difficulty. Hitler also, of course, recognized the potential of siting his lookalike Colosseum on the lake, because when the lighting conditions are right, you get this tremendous mirror image of the building in the lake. It really does work. But as you can probably imagine, any ground that is close to a lake is going to be rather soft and marshy. So, how are you going to sink in the foundations? I'll tell you, with great difficulty and at great cost. So much so, of course, that Hitler's treasury are getting more anxious by the minute. And they pluck up the courage, because generally you don't ask questions, because it could have repercussions. But they actually asked Hitler, how are we going to pay for all this? And he apparently was quite unruffled and just replied with a shrug, once we win the war, the subjugated nations will pay for it. End of story. So, as you probably know, Hitler was extremely popular because he did launch lots and lots of job creation programs. You've all heard of the motorways. Hitler built the motorways. It wasn't his idea, of course, he picked up on it. But about 250,000 people were employed on the motorways, building the motorways. The construction industry, they built. More jobs. How are you paying for that? You're not. You're running up huge debts that Hitler actually had no intention of paying, because his plan was always, from the first, conquest. If people had read his book, seriously, it was all set out there. Living space for this superior race. How are you going to get living space? People are not going to give it up voluntarily, so it's going to be conquest. So, there we have it, in a nutshell. We're going back the way we came, but we're going to take a different route, and it'll take us past the third of the three venues that were used. You probably saw the football stadium. It was also used. It was originally built in 1928, and it was used by a particular organization, and I'm sure you'll have heard of them. They were called the Hitler Youth Organization. What people haven't really heard of generally is the female organization called the BDM, because the girls had an organization too, boys and girls. In 1939, both of these organizations became compulsory, so you had to be in it. My husband's German, and his father, once confided in him. He was in it because you had to be, of course, it was compulsory. And he told my husband he had a great time because they did really cool things. And like that concept of community, on the surface, what's wrong with outdoor sports, camping, promoting a sense of team spirit, and fostering personal initiative? All of these things are per se things that you would want for your children. But the rub, of course, is it was used to indoctrinate and brainwash the young. Can you imagine what a hard wicket in Germany the Boy Scouts have? People tend to equate it far too much with the Hitler Youth Organization. Look across on your left-hand side now, and you'll see a huge leafy park. That was the third venue, and it was used by that organization we talked about earlier, the SS. They were joined by the SA, which stands for Sturmabteilung, the stormtroopers. German's a lovely, lots of people think German's a very harsh language, but if you've ever read the Romantic poets, German can be very beautiful as well. Anyway, Sturmabteilung were the stormtroopers, the paratroopers, and the SS, as we said, the Schutzstaffel. Originally a small elite force, part of the SA, but modelled, again remember Hitler's fixation with the Roman Empire, modelled on the Roman Praetorian Guard. Designed as a small elite force, but of course later staffed the concentration camps and the like. So that was a brief encounter with the rally grounds. We're going to leave them now, but we've another element that we've still got to cover. That's coming up a little later on at the west end of the city, because that's where the Palace of Justice is located. And we'll talk a little bit about the Nuremberg trials. which were conducted by the Allies, the four Allied powers, at the end of the Second World War. So just about now, as we pass the road end, you'll get a better view looking back diagonally, and you'll be able to see the four large windows because they run the entire length of the courtroom. In the day, the curtains were always kept tightly closed for security reasons. The windows were bulletproofed. Courtroom 600, yeah, they were really paranoid by the time it got to the end. And this amazing building, these are the courthouses. The building is very much in the style that we've been talking about. It was built from 1912 to 1916.
It's pretty fast. It's a beautiful building. For like such a big building.
Yeah. We are taking, on Sergei's initiative, we're taking a shortcut. Yeah. This could, of course, backfire.
Could backfire, yeah.
Which is sometimes why we don't do it. To people, they realised graveyards beside the churches inside the city walls was not a particularly good idea. So they were closed down and new cemeteries built outside the city walls. And that cemetery that you've just passed, it's called St. John's. That was when it was built. Originally, it was something else. It first saw the light of day in 1234, when it was a colony. There were four outside the city walls, and these colonies were for people who'd contracted an incurable disease. Leprosy, exactly. Today, thankfully, there's a cure for it. Back then, there wasn't. So, leprosy, exactly. This part of town is called the North Town, and it's, you could say, slightly more upmarket than the South Town. As you can perhaps see from some of the buildings, the architecture. And as we turn the corner, you'll see some lovely examples of villas. So, as everywhere, some people made more money out of the Industrial Revolution than others, and they built their villas here. Nowadays, these are generally not family homes anymore. They're businesses, surgeries, and the like. But originally, they were family homes. And there's quite an interesting one along the road, coming up on the right-hand side. You can hire it for an occasion, you can have your wedding reception in it. But they researched into some of the previous owners of the house. I'll point it out along the road. One was a Jewish family, and they, of course, had a very tragic fate that awaited them in the night of the broken glass. And another owner who came after the Jewish family. This is it here, by the way. If you look here on your right, you see that yellowish building. It's very beautiful. It's called Willibald, and you can see available for off-site workshops, you name it. Anyway, the lady, the subsequent owner, she had a rather catchy nickname. They called her Gangster Gabby. Gangster Gabby. And she wasn't the gangster, but she defended gangsters. She was a lawyer. She must have been quite a remarkable person because, in the 1940s, how many women were lawyers, and she worked for the Americans, and she provided the defense for, war criminals. So gangster Gabby. We're about to head up now towards the castle. So this is an early warning for you, and about 10 minutes time, we will be leaving the coach, or rather, those of you who are in Group D will be leaving. It's supposed to be holed up in some village in Upper Bavaria, but it doesn't look like Upper Bavaria because it's Hungary. There you go. Don't know why they did that. And we certainly, we never saw hadn't our hair of Russell Crowe in Nuremberg. He was not here.
Of course not.
But I'm told the film is very good. A couple of our colleagues have seen it already, and a few